Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this next episode of the Rock Jumper Dream Destination series. My name is Daniel Dankwitz, and I am reaching out to you live this evening from a very windy and very cold Cape Town here in what should be a sunny South Africa. Thank you so much for all taking the time out of your day to join us this evening as we share a bit of escapism. And Paul, who is online with us this evening, joining from Norfolk in the UK, is going to be talking us through India. India is one of my favorite countries. I've been lucky enough in my time at Rock Jumper to visit several times. It's one of those destinations that you just absolutely fall in love with. It's a complete feast for the senses, some fantastic birds, incredible animals, beautiful scenery, rich and vibrant culture. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. Just before I get started, from all of us at Rock Jumper, we'd like to just share our thanks for sticking with us after last week's technical glitch. Unfortunately, these things do occasionally happen with live entertainment, but thank you so much for joining this week and for rescheduling your calendars to accommodate tonight's webinar. We really are grateful for the support, and we hope that you thoroughly enjoy tonight's webinar. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and it will be made available in 1 to 2 days on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. If you have missed any of our previous webinars, you can find all of the live recordings there. And additionally, please note that Paul will be available to answer your questions come the end of the webinar. So please post any questions that you might have in the Q&A box, which is down near the base of your screens. I will be checking throughout Paul's webinar and I'll be able to answer some of your questions as we go, but Paul will certainly be around to answer your questions in more detail come the end. So keep those questions coming. We love them. We love the opportunity to interact with you from a distance. And Paul is certainly one of the experts when it comes to India. Furthermore, if you enjoy this webinar, please stay tuned for our exciting series of webinars to come, highlighting Honduras and several other destinations. We'll be working with our tour leaders on an exciting schedule, basically running until the end of the year. So look out for those marketing emails and join us in the weeks to come as we explore the rest of the world together. Now, on to our speaker tonight, Paul Varney. Paul's background is in the agricultural sciences, and he used this as an avenue through which he traveled the world, managing geographically dispersed teams in destinations such as India, Brazil, Costa Rica, China, and the Philippines, among many parts of Europe as well. Throughout his travels, Paul has always been quick to add a few weekends here and there to make the most of the birding opportunities along the way. And in fact, Paul has been actively birding now for over 40 years and has been a permanent tour leader at Rock Jumper for several years now, covering many parts of Africa, Asia, Europe, and Australasia. Paul is currently based, and as I mentioned, is joining us this evening from Norfolk in the UK, where he mentions it's much sunnier and much warmer than it is here in
Very
Cape
pleasant.
Town. A little bit jealous about that. So this evening, Paul is going to be talking to us about northern India, truly a wondrous destination if there ever was one, and it's complete with excellent birding opportunities, some of the best birds and mammals on the planet, in my opinion, and fascinating culture to boot. This is a destination that can be enjoyed by both birders and non-birders alike, boasting excellent standards of accommodation. Some of the very best hotels I've stayed in anywhere on tour have been in India. The photographic opportunities are absolutely excellent, again, combining a mix of birding, wildlife, and culture. And India, as a nation, has some of the highest avian and mammal diversity in all of Asia. So it really is an incredible destination, and I'm so excited to hear what Paul has to share with us this evening. So Paul, with that, I'm going to hand over to you. I will switch my camera off and go dark for a little while, but I will be here in the backgrounds to answer any questions. Keep those questions coming, and we will chat to you again come the end of the webinar.
Thanks very much, Dan. Appreciate that introduction. And hello, everybody. Nice to be with you. And a massive apologies for those of you that did try and join last week. I had huge problems trying to connect to Zoom. Hopefully tonight it's going to be a much plainer sailing. and we enjoy a kind of trip around northern India with no technical hitches. So let's see how we get on. And as Dan says, if you've got any questions, please flag them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen or wherever it is on your screen. And Dan will either cover them as we go, or we can address some of them at the end of the talk. So looking forward to taking you around northern India. So India, this is an amazing country, as Dan has already alluded to, with some incredible scenery, some incredible wildlife, an amazing culture. And as Dan said, it is really an experience that you have to have in your life. It's an amazing country that's probably different from everywhere else I've ever been. It's a large country. It's just over a third of the size of the USA. So it's a pretty large country. And the population now, and this is something you actually notice when you're there, it's now the most populous country on the planet, overtaking China with more than 1.4 billion people. And actually, this is one of the things that you actually notice when you're there. When you're there, you feel this kind of big population, certainly in the big cities. But as you're moving between locations, the cities don't seem to stop. The people are living everywhere. So it is somewhere where you kind of get this amazing kind of wealth of people in different places, but all around the country, you're finding different people living there. It's obviously the largest democracy in the world. And as Dan's already talked about, because it's such a large country with such a diverse array of habitats, it's got a huge species list, over nearly 1,400 species of bird on the list. And actually, if you look at the kind of map on the left-hand side there, you go right from down in the south, where you've got tropical coastlines, you've got open grassland, you've got desert. There's the Thar Desert in Rajasthan is almost 200,000 square kilometers, right up to boreal forest and up into the high snow peak caps of the foothills of the Himalayas. So you have a huge range of habitats, and that lends itself to a huge diversity of bird populations. Of course, it's also on a migration pathway, with birds going up into northern China and up into Siberia. So you get birds moving north and south in India, as well as the resident species. And as Dan says, as well as that, it's also got a huge and extensive mammal list with some of the most spectacular mammals on the planet. Some really classy animals, some big game, some big cats, including one extremely famous one in the Bengal Tiger, elephants, rhinos, bears, as well as lots of other mammals that we bump into, deer and cattle, primates as well. So it's a really amazing trip with a whole load of animals and birds to see. And that diversity of habitat really lends itself to seeing different habitats. Even on the short tour that we're going to talk about in northern India, we see different habitats, which means that we get some different birds. So the tour focuses in the north part of India, north central part of India, and we start our tour in New Delhi, and we're really looking at this area. So we're looking to just south below Agra and up into the foothills of the Himalayas. So in this little area is where we're going to focus the tour. I'll talk about this part of the tour primarily, but I'll also talk about a couple of the other tours that Syngenta offers, Syngenta Rock Jumper offers, in terms of where we do other tours, and they are in the northeast up into Assam, and also up into to the areas around the Himalayas and on the Bhutan border. So we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in the time to come. So first, I'm going to focus on this tour and the Northeast India Birds and Tigers tour. So as I've said, this is the kind of the sites that we tend to focus on. We start our tour in New Delhi. You see the little red star that's just flashed up on the top middle of the screen. And our first location is Sultanpur. It's a nice little wetland just outside Delhi, where we'll go and get a nice introduction to the birds, some of the birds of India, some of the wetland species. So a really nice, gentle introduction to some birding, seeing some of the wetland specialities, and we'll talk about each of these sites in a bit more detail. We'll then head northeast up into the foothills of the Himalayas towards Ramnagar, and around here is a really nice river called the Kosi River. And we'll also cover places like Manila and Sattal, which are really into the foothills of the Himalayas, and go to an amazing park called Corbett National Park, which is one of my favorite places to go birding and just see some amazing wildlife, as well as being in a really amazing location for wildlife, but just a really brilliant location in terms of just the scenery as well. We'll then head back to New Delhi before we then head further south down into the southwest to Ranthambhore. And Ranthambhore is a really famous nature reserve. It's much different habitat to what we've already looked at. It's dry, open forest with some lakes and some open savanna. But this is a really famous location for tiger. So this is a really good place for tiger. And we'll talk about some of the other things that we can see there as well. But this is one of the famous locations where tigers are a really good chance of seeing tiger, which is one of the real draws of going on this North India tour. We'll then look at places like Keoladeo. And Keoladeo is also known as Bharatpur. It's a famous nature reserve. Again, another wetland nature reserve, so a different range of species to the ones we've already seen. Some overlap with Sultanpur, but essentially a whole range of new birds that we might find there, some special ones. We'll take in some cultural sites around this area as well in Fatehpur Sikri. And we'll also go on the river at Chambal, where we'll do a little boat trip on the river to look for some special animals and birds on the river there as well, before we end back at Delhi and finish our tour, and then either take perhaps an extension to somewhere else or depart home having had an amazing experience in India. So that's a kind of a summary of the tour that we're going to do. And I'm going to take you now into the country itself. And as Dan's already alluded to, India is just an experience that's like no other. It's a sensory overload. It's hustle and bustle, the smells, the sights, the sounds, the noises. India is just a rich country in every sense. It is frenetic. It is loads of hustle and bustle. It never seems to sleep in the big cities. This is just not far from our hotel in Delhi. There's a guy walking down a main highway there on the right-hand side. You'll notice that the cars are 6 abreast and they're often going in different directions. And India is like no other country I've ever been to in that respect. It's got its own rules, and that experience is something that you need to experience once in your life. It really is an amazing country for just feeling in it like you're in a completely different place. As well as that, you've also got the complete opposite. Places like this. This is a photograph from Corbett National Park. This is just outside our lodgings where we stay. This is actually a river. It looks like a massive lake. This is the river outside. Normally, the river is much lower than this, and it's a gravelly, kind of rocky riverbed. But this time, it was when I was there the last time, it was really high water. But normally, this rocky riverbed is kind of open with rocks everywhere, and there are palaces, fish eagles sitting there, and storks around. It's an amazing place and really tranquil. The complete opposite from Delhi and when you're in the big city. So a really beautiful location, and this is what you get with India. You get this amazing richness of kind of hustle and bustle, and then you go to these places which are kind of the ideal of kind of perfect habitat, tranquility, lots of birds, lots of wildlife, and you get to sort of see these two places on the same trip. It's really quite an amazing experience. So now, starting the tour properly, I'm going to talk to where we're going to go. We're going to go first to Sultanpur. So not far outside Delhi, there's a national park. It was only declared a national park in 1991. And previously, it was a salt works. They were extracting salt from this area. So they were mining salt. But this became uneconomic in the late 19th century, and they lay dormant. But then, because of the amount of birds and wildlife that was on the site, it was then kind of made a national park in 1991. And this is a really nice, easy introduction for us on our trip. It's only about 15, 20 kilometers outside Delhi. So we take our bus and we end up at Sultanpur. And we see some birds immediately, some really nice to see birds. Painted stork, a really elegant looking stork with this kind of lovely black and white barring on the wing coverts. It's also got this amazing pink flush on the rump and the tertials, similar to the yellow-billed stork that you get in Africa, but actually much more brightly coloured. So very nice bird. And in the wetland areas, often you'll be accompanied the storks with these things: grey-headed swamp hen. The swamp hens have been split into a whole range of species depending on the colour of their heads and their backs. And this is the grey-headed swamp hen that you get in Sultanpur in India. Really nice colours in bright sunshine, with the blues and the turquoises. Nice chunky red bill. And these are quite common in the marshes and the wetland areas around Sultanpur. And as we're walking around this reserve, we'll see in the scrub, there's lots of bits of scrub and forest, and there'll be some wintering birds like blue throats, which are quite common. They come out and sort of perch at the side of the paths as you're walking around. There'll also be things like flycatchers and cuckoos as we're walking around, as well as lots of ducks and different species of ducks on the reserve, as well as also some raptors as well. So we often see quite a lot of birds. But as I said, a really nice introduction, good opportunities for photography at Sultanpur, with nice open kind of panoramas where you can see into the wetlands and see the birds quite clearly. It's also our first opportunity to see some mammals. And one of the mammals that's quite common around Sultanpur is the nilgai, or blue bull. This is the largest antelope in Asia. It's up to 300 kilograms, so 660 odd pounds. It's a big beast. And the males are this lovely kind of blue-grey colour. That's the other name for them, is blue bull. So the males, although they've only got short antlers, have got this lovely bluey-grey colour with this white throat. And they're quite common walking around on the edge of the wetlands areas, and sometimes even swimming out into the middle of the pools. So Sultanpur, a really nice introduction, easy birding, and our first day is kind of complete. We head back to our hotel for a good night's sleep, some nice Indian food, and then the next day we're going to head further north and try and head up towards the areas of Kosi River up by the Himalayas. So we're going to head now northeast. If you remember the first map, we're going to head up to the northeast to the Himalayan foothills, where we've got some completely different habitats to what we've already seen at Sultanpur. We're now into kind of the lowlands, at the foothills of the Himalayas, really lovely kind of flowing whitewater rivers. The river's got lots of rocks around and lovely clear water and some nice riverine forest, and then up into montane forest as we go up into the higher reaches of the Himalayan foothills. Now, in order to get up there, I've already talked about how busy the roads are in India. So in order to get there, we decide that the easiest way is to take the train. And this in itself is another amazing experience to take in India. We arrive at the early hours of the morning to get our train up to Kosi River and Ramnagar. And already there's hardly any parking. It's really busy. As soon as we arrive, a whole army of porters kick into action, grab our luggage, perch them on their heads, and take them off to our train on our awaiting platform. And then we join our train and we head up to Ramnagar. It's about a 4 or 5 hour journey, depending on how many stops there are. And this is the easiest way to travel. That means you can get up and walk around. The roads in India are quite challenging sometimes, so this is definitely the easiest way to travel. And an early morning trip up to there means we get there with some time for birding in the afternoon or even late morning. And as soon as we get out to this part of the world, we start to see really smart birds. On the edges of the river, we can see the rocky river now. We'll start to find things like white-capped redstart, a really stunning bird. Both the male and female look the same, so they're all smart. This lovely deep red and black with this striking white cap. So white-capped redstart's really quite a common bird in this area. And their cousin, the smaller, much smaller plumbeous water redstart, or plumbeous redstart. Male's this lovely lead grey, beautiful lead grey and an orange-red tail. Classic redstart with the red tail. Can't see it in the photo very well, but a beautiful lead grey colour. The females look completely different. The females are all kind of crescent markings underneath with a black and white tail. So both of them are quite striking, but they look completely different. So they're quite common in this area around the rivers. flicking around every time you're walking down the river. You'll sort of see these kind of flicking ahead of you and get some nice views of these really stunning birds. But the Kosi River's got some really special birds, and one of the first ones we're going to encounter probably is this one, the crested kingfisher. And the crested kingfisher is a large kingfisher. It's probably similar in size to the belted kingfisher that you get in the US, North America. So a large chunky kingfisher with this lovely double crest and these kind of lovely black and white barred upper parts. And there's some also barring on the underparts. But a nice kingfisher that frequents the edge of the river or sits on boulders in the river. And we normally get some really nice views of these birds as we're kind of walking up and down the edge of the river or crossing bridges around this area. But this area has got some really special species that we go for. The first one that we might encounter that we're really trying hard to find is a monotypic bird that everybody wants to see in their life, which is this one, Wallcreeper. And this is a fantastic photograph by one of our colleagues, Stu Elsom. And this is typical of the views that you might get in the river at Kosi. Normally, when you're looking for Wallcreepers, you're thinking high cliffs, vertical sheer cliffs, high up, looking with your telescope. The Kosi River, these guys come down and are feeding around on boulders at the side of the river, on the river banks themselves. So they're actually at eye level, or you're looking down on them, and you get some really nice views if you're really lucky. They're not always easy to find, but a fantastic bird. And when they fly, they're only quite small, but when they fly, they've got these broad wings with this lovely crimson patch that you can just see on this exposed wing here. So this crimson patch with these white spots on the edge of the wing, but the wings are really broadly fingered at the end. So round wings with this lovely crimson patch, and they look like a butterfly or a moth as they flit around the rocks in the river. But a really nice bird to see, and Kosi River is a really good place to see these species. But there's another bird that's arguably even more special than that one that everybody wants to see at the Kosi River, and there's normally a few of these flicking around, but we just need to find them. We need to search hard, and that's this one, Ibisbill. So Ibisbill, again, monotypic. It's in its own family. It doesn't really look like anything else. It's got a beak like a curlew, this long curved bill, but it's bright red. It's got this black face, grey neck, and it's got a large black band on its chest. So a really fantastic bird. And the Kosi River, there's normally a few birds wintering around this area. So we normally get some quite nice views of this species as it's kind of flicking around on the edge of the rivers, perhaps one or two birds, maybe two or three even. Sometimes you can get some really fantastic views. And in fact, this is one of Dan's photos. I'm not sure we'll always get views as good as this, but it's a super bird, and I know that everybody wants to see Ibisbill when you go to this part of India. It's a special one that everybody's got on their high priority list, and the Kosi River normally delivers. So good chance of seeing this at the Kosi River. So that's covered the Kosi River. We then head up into the hills proper, and we're going to go to a place called Manila. And Manila is really into the kind of proper Himalayan hills now, and this part of the world is really good for pheasants, and some of the birds that have been high up on the peaks of the Himalayas have come down lower at this time of year. So in the forests around here, there's lots of Philoscopus warblers, laughing thrushes, chats, and we're going to search for birds up in this area. And the scenery around here is unbelievable. It's a breathtaking panorama looking into the far Himalayas. And the peaks in the distance that we're looking at are 7,000 meter peaks, covered in snow. And often at this time of year, you've got this fantastic blue skies, fantastic weather, and an incredible scenery that you're kind of birding in. So you're walking along roads or tracks with this as a backdrop. It's fantastic. Obviously, we're high now. We're starting to get a bit higher, and it's a bit cold in the mornings, but by the mid-morning, it's normally warmed up quite nicely. And so layers is really important, taking off your layers and being able to do that. But first thing in the morning, it can be pretty chilly up here. And of course, there's always a chance that the weather could close in and you could get a bit of a rainstorm or even a snowstorm, even at this altitude. So amazing place to go birding, and some great birds up here. So some of the birds we might be looking for up here are the chats and the robins, and two of the species that we're targeting up here are things like Himalayan ruby throat. Everybody loves a ruby throat, and Himalayan ruby throat's a really smart looking one with this nice black band across the chest. And the other bird that's quite common up here is Himalayan bluetail. And this is a nice male, the lovely blue supercilium and blue upper parts, but this kind of pale blue stripe above the eye, and this lovely orange flank. So Himalayan bluetail and Himalayan ruby throat are both birds that we'll be searching for in this kind of high montane forest and scrubby areas. And as we go further along the roads, we'll be looking for different flocks of birds or species, and we might come across things like chestnut-crowned laughing thrush on the left-hand side here. Nice kind of orangey head, and then these kind of lovely olive yellow wings, speckled chest. So nice looking laughing thrush. And also common up here is the rufous sibia. And often these birds are in kind of little groups. They'll be flicking around together in little mixed flocks. So sometimes you'll see a group of birds coming through, and it'll be a whole range of different species. So flicking through the birds, we're trying to search through to see if we can find some of the different species that we might find. And these two are often in amongst the flocks. But as I've said, one of the birds that we're trying to find up here is pheasants. And one of the pheasants that we're looking for up here is cockless pheasant. And cockless pheasant is really quite shy, but sometimes we can get lucky and they can come out on the road in the early morning, and they'll even walk quite close to the cars or to where we're birding from as a small group. Cockless pheasant's kind of a nice, chunky, large pheasant with this kind of lovely, kind of variegated plumage and a bright green, metallic green head. This doesn't show too well on the photograph, but this bright green metallic head. And actually, they've got a large crest, which they sometimes push up as well. So cockless pheasant is actually a very shy bird, quite tricky to see, but good chances to find it up on the foothills around Manila. So that's a good bird that we're looking for. But perhaps even scarcer and more localized is the cheer pheasant. And the cheer pheasant is perhaps a little bit duller. It's confined to the Himalayas. It's not the brightest pheasant in the world, but quite scarce and quite difficult to see. And it frequents these kind of grassy slopes in these kind of Himalayan foothills with rocks and boulders. But these, looking from the road, looking down, we'll be looking at the grassy slopes, see if we can come across a male or female cheer pheasant as they're wandering around in these grassy areas. And this is probably one of the best places in the world to try and find cheer pheasant. So good chance at Manila, it's one of the best places now to see these birds. So while we're birding these areas, we'll be walking along roads and we'll be looking at forest and looking at into kind of bits of scrub. And quite often we'll be using the call, or we're playing the call, or even whistling the call of the collared owlet. And it always occurred to me that, you know, the collared owlet, when you play a collared owlet call, it always seems to elicit a response immediately. And it always kind of perplexed me a little bit as to why the birds were so quick to react. And then one day we heard some mobbing. We looked into the trees and we saw this in front of us. A collared owlet having caught an oriental magpie robin. So in the daylight, and you can see the magpie robin's larger than the owlet itself. So they're really ferocious little predators. And this is why all the birds mob them. So the collared owlet call that is often used by the guides, by us, to try and elicit a response from other birds, almost in this Himalayan foothill area, kind of works instantaneously. You'll play the call and birds will come immediately. And some of the birds that will come will be warblers. And this is a great place to see some of the Philoscopus warblers. Now, our warblers in Europe and Asia are a little bit less bright than some of the warblers that you see in North America. Ours are more subtly olive and brown and yellowy, with different wing bars and tertial edges. And this is what we're looking for. We're looking for the different patterns of the wing bars and the tertial edges and the tail pattern and the supercilium and crown stripes. And we've got two species here on the left-hand side, ashy-throated warbler or ashy-throated leaf warbler, this lovely greyish head and greyish throat, double wing bar. It would also have white in the outer tail. And on the right-hand side, buff-barred leaf warbler, this lovely broad kind of greater covert bar, which is, you can clearly see it's quite buffy on the photograph there. But both of these are really smart and often in mixed flocks, sometimes with lemon rump or Pallas's warblers. So great birds to see in this area. that are kind of in these mixed flocks, and you'll see lots of these as we hopefully kind of call some of the birds in, but also these mixed flocks just moving through often contain these species. And as I've said, we're walking around these roads, and we'll have lunch up along the roadside, a nice hot lunch normally brought up to us. And while we're sitting there having lunch, we might have birds around us, like the black-throated bush tit, a really spanking little bird, beautiful little thing with this chestnut crown and this incredible black face markings and throat markings and a bright yellow eye. Super little bird, and often in nice little flocks. So you often get a group of these coming through. And top right, you've got blue-fronted redstart, a really striking looking bird, and not uncommon in this area. We also may come across blue-capped redstart, which is also really pretty. And overhead, we might have Himalayan griffon vultures soaring overhead, as well as a Himalayan vulture, so some raptors as well around the area. And Himalayan griffons are a huge vulture, and really nice to see. And it also might be our chance to see Himalayan goral, this goat-like animal that kind of frequents these kind of rocky slopes. So they're not uncommon up there, and there's a good chance of bumping into one or two of those around. So great birding up at Manila, and some really nice birds in a fantastic scenery. Before we then head to Jim Corbett National Park. And Jim Corbett National Park is a super place. It's a beautiful place. It was the first national park in India, and it was set up as a national park in 1936, named after a British naturalist and hunter, Jim Corbett. It's about 520 square kilometers, so about 520 square kilometers. So it's a large area, and it's around 400 to 1200 meters above sea level. So it's kind of into the sort of higher elevation, and really, really pretty in terms of the kind of the habitat that you're driving through. This is where Project Tiger was initially launched. It is a reserve that's got tigers in it, and we'll talk about those in a second. So this is where they launched Project Tiger in 1973, and that's been one of the most successful conservation projects that's ever been launched. So the populations of tigers are doing quite well in India now. And because there are tigers in this park, and because there are elephants and other animals, you only travel around this park in vehicles. So we normally do all our birding from open jeeps in convoy, and it's a really nice way of getting around large areas of the park and seeing some of the wild animals and birds as we go around. And it's a large park. It's got about a list of about nearly 600 species of bird. And as you're driving around, you might come across Pallas's fish eagle. This is a pretty scarce bird in large parts of its range, but around Jim Corbett National Park, it's actually pretty common, and we quite often see these soaring overhead. And as I said earlier, they may even be sitting on the river when you're at your lodgings. So nice to see Pallas's fish eagle. And it's also a good area for seeing red-headed vulture, one of the vultures that's really struggling in Asia, declined in many places, and this is still quite a stronghold from them, seeing them perched up or flying overhead. So a really smart vulture with this kind of lovely pink bare skin on the head, large chunky bill, and this kind of pale wing panel as it flies. As we drive around to the darker parts of the forest, down some of the roads, we might come across things like long-billed thrush. This is a crazy looking bird with this, it looks like the beak's been put on the wrong bird. So its beak is far too long for the size of the bird, and its head. It's got this huge kind of schnozzle on it. But a nice bird, quite scarce, very, very shy. So it frequents the sort of dark sides of the road and under canopy, sort of like just around the edges of ditches. And sometimes we can come across one of these as we're driving along and get some good views. Some more colourful species like blue-bearded bee-eater, sometimes around the area where we lodge. And also our first opportunity to perhaps see some bigger animals like Asian elephant. There's some big areas of open grassland and adjacent to the rivers and to the lakes in Jim Corbett National Park. And while we're searching for other birds, maybe Siberian ruby throat, things like this, we might come across things like Asian elephant. So nice to be able to see these in the wild. And again, another good reason why when we're driving around this park, we're staying in the vehicles. there are quite a big population of Asian elephant in Jim Corbett National Park. But as we're driving around, we're often along the edge of the rivers where we might see things like lesser fish eagle, smart-looking eagle with this kind of white vent, and also changeable hawk eagle. Again, these have different kind of plumages ranging from dark through to light. This is probably an immature one sitting in the edge of the river. And also right down to the tiny collared falconet, which these are often around the actual lodgings themselves. And it's a tiny falcon. It's probably the size of a bit larger than something like a Swainston thrush or a song thrush. So a fairly small falcon, mainly catching insects and lizards and maybe some small birds, but really colourful as well, with this lovely orangey kind of underparts, this kind of glossy black upper parts, and this black eye mask with a big white stripe above it. So a really nice bird to see and very common around this area. As we're also kind of along the river edge here, we might see river tern flying past. A beautiful tern, really lovely silvery grey wings, large chunky orangey yellow bill, and this is quite a good place to see river tern. We might see these at other places, but this is a good place to see them along the river at Jim Corbett. And one of the other things that we'll see lots of and hear lots of are spotted deer or chital. These are very, very common in the park, and they're really pretty. They're really good-looking deer. The males have got nice antlers as well, but the females are spotted. So even into adulthood, they retain their spots. And these are a staple diet for one of the big predators of India, the Bengal tiger. And honestly, it's really hard to describe what it's like to see a tiger. Your first tiger is a real moment. It's a special moment when you first get your eyes on the tiger. Sometimes it takes a little while, because you can see this one here is hiding in the kind of in the scrub, so it takes you perhaps a little while to find it. But as soon as you find it and you see that amazing head pattern with all these kind of white stripes and black and orange stripes, it's a real moment. It's a fantastic animal to see. Your first one is incredible, and every subsequent afterwards is also incredible. It's just an amazing animal to see, and you can never see enough tigers in your life in the wild. It's just superb. And if you're lucky, you'll see it kind of slinking off into the undergrowth and give you some nice views. And we'll come back to tiger as well when we go to Ranthambhore later on, which is probably an even better place to see them. It's not guaranteed at Jim Corbett. There's a good chance, and you know, there's we'll do a bit of touring around trying to find one, and if anybody else finds one, normally everybody knows about it, so we'll kind of head back to where people are seeing it from. But Jim Corbett's also a good place for leopard, and if you're really lucky, there's a good chance that you could find a leopard. They're very, very shy, another immensely powerful predator, and an incredible animal to see, and perhaps, you know, leopard and tiger are probably two of the most amazing big cats to see in the world. So, and Jim Corbett's got both of them, so a good chance of seeing both of these animals in the wild. So we're obviously on the lookout for these things as we're driving around, as well as lots of birds. So heading away from Jim Corbett, we then go to Sattal. So again, we're kind of now into kind of slightly lower forest in the hills. Still lots of birds around, still lots of nice forest, and we're looking for birds that are kind of wintering at lower altitude than that are bred on the higher peaks of the Himalayas and then come down. Some of the local guides will know where there might be a tawny fish owl roost, so we might come across this on our first morning, roosting alongside a river often. Really amazing large eagle owl type species. So it's a large owl and a lovely kind of tawny color below with these kind of beautiful stripes and the kind of two big ear tufts on the top of the head, kind of scraggly head, but a really smart looking owl. And in the rivers, we're looking for things like spotted forked owl. All of the forked owls are really smart with this kind of, most of them have this long kind of black and white tail that's got these kind of crescents on them. But spotted forked owl is one of the biggest, and it has this amazing sort of galaxy of white spots on the back of its on its mantle. So a really smart bird to see, and they frequent the rivers around Sattal in this area here as well. So we often see these working the river with the white-capped redstarts and the plumbeous redstarts. So so really nice to see these birds kind of feeding in the rivers here. And again, another place where we could see long-billed thrush, which we've already maybe seen in Jim Corbett, but a really good bird there. And then as we go into the kind of scrub around this area, we might come across golden bush robin, a really spectacular looking species. This is a nice male. They have this lovely kind of yellow underparts with this black eye mask and a superb black and yellow tail. So really super looking bird. And that's one we're definitely trying to find if we can in the kind of scrub around the edges of the forest and in the alongside the rivers. So a nice bird to see. And then also at Sattal, we have the opportunity to visit some feeding places where there's some hides set up, some blinds or some hides, and the birds come in to feed, and we get some nice opportunities to see some birds at close range. It's quite relaxing sitting in the hide for an hour or two, and we might get things like chestnut-bellied nuthatch, a super-looking nuthatch with this lovely pale bluey grey upper parts, this white flash on the cheek, and this deep chestnut underparts right from the chin right down to the vent. A super looking bird, a really nice looking nuthatch, and they come to the feeders quite frequently, along with some woodpeckers like this beautiful greater yellownape, a really chunky woodpecker. It's quite a large woodpecker, not quite as large as pileated, but it's a big woodpecker. This lovely greenish olive upper parts with this nice yellow kind of mane on the back of its neck. So a good name there, greater yellownape. So a nice bird, and they often come into the feeders. We also might see things like red-billed blue magpie, a really impressive bird, a really chunky bird. It's quite large, with this kind of bluish upper parts, this amazing long graduated black and white tip tail, and black face mask with this large red bill. There is a yellow-billed blue magpie, which you get into the higher Himalayas, but red-billed blue magpie is the one that we're going to find on this tour. And a super smart bird it is, and it comes into the feeders at Sattal, so often a chance to get good views. And also around this area, some sunbirds might come in to drink from the pools or feeding on kind of adjacent foliage and flowers. On the left-hand side, a nice male crimson sunbird with this beautiful red kind of four parts, and when it turns, the crown is purplish, and so is the malar streak. And on the right-hand side, you've got green-tailed sunbird, a real a specialist of this area, found in the kind of lower sort of hills of the Himalayas, with this lovely deep maroon kind of coloured back and yellow chest, and a greenish tail and a greenish crown. Super-looking bird. Green-tailed sunbird is one of the really smart-looking ones. So we'll keep an eye out for them, and they should be quite easy to find. They're normally not too uncommon. And then other birds that come in would be this bird, red-billed leothrix, used to be called Peking robin. A super little bird, really pretty little bird when you get a nice view of one. It's like a babbler type species in the babbler family, but really kind of brightly coloured with this lovely kind of orange and yellows on the wings and the throat. So super looking bird. But one of the reasons that we go to these hides is that sometimes we get pheasants coming in. I've already seen a couple of pheasants, hopefully by now. And one of the other ones we might see at the hide is the Kalaj pheasant. This is a nice male with this kind of lovely silvery kind of chest plumes and little crest. He's kind of bluey grey, a bluish sheen above. So Kalaj pheasant often come in big groups. So there may be several males and females coming at the same time and wander through where the food is laid out in front of the hide. But one of the other species that we're really hoping to see, which is much shyer and much more difficult to see, we'll probably hear it quite a lot, but seeing one is much more challenging, is rufous-throated partridge. A really pretty little partridge, tiny little bird, and the males have got this lovely little throat, red throat, with these lovely markings on the flanks as well. And these hides are really good places to sort of get good views of rufous-throated partridge coming down to feed at the hide. So we've now been into the foothills of the Himalayas. We've covered that habitat. We're going to head back south towards Delhi before we then get another train and we head back towards Ranthambhore, down in the south of the tour. And we're going to head to Ranthambhore National Park now. And this is located in Rajasthan. It's a national park that was declared in 1980. It was previously a hunting ground for the Maharajas. So it was basically a kind of hunting playground. It's a huge reserve. The forest itself is about 1,300 square kilometers, but the actual reserve of Ranthambhore is about 400 square kilometers, so still quite sizable. And within the national park itself, it has a fort, and in the fort you have several temples. So it often gets lots of visitors coming into the beginning of the park to go to the temple. So as you're driving in as a wildlife visitor, you might see lots of people coming in, and it's primarily because a lot of people are visiting the local temples in the actual fort itself. Around this area, there's lots of crafts and locally skilled people that are making different things like jewelry. This guy's making some bracelets from a gum from a tree over some hot coals, and he'll sit there and you can watch him make them, and then you can purchase them. And we'll also visit places where you can buy some of the local kind of textiles. Some of the textiles in these areas are amazing. These ladies, we kind of like to support the local ladies that are making these amazing textiles. So we tend to kind of have a little time to visit some of these areas and sort of see what they've got on offer. And quite a few people end up purchasing large amounts of cloth to take home with them back to the US or to the UK or wherever. But as we go into the park, we start to leave some of the crowds behind, and we travel around into the reserve on these large vehicles called a canter. So it's like an open back sort of small truck, 4-wheel drive with visibility all round, so we can get good views into the forest. And you can see that we're now into kind of dry, open forest with a kind of an open understory. You can see the road is very dry, sandy, and it's quite bumpy as we're driving around on these vehicles. But you nevertheless get a good opportunity to drive around and look into the forest itself. And we're looking for the birds, we're looking for the wild animals, and there's all sorts of things that we can find in this park. The birds are quite often easy to see. Here's a little rufous tree pie that kind of decided to almost sit on my head. And the rufous tree pies are quite easy to see in this area. We might have tried to see these at other places, but in Ranthambhore they're really common. And you can just see above my head in the photograph here the fort in the rock, built into the rock above. This is the entrance to the park itself. So we've left the people behind this gate in the fort. That's where the temples are. And then we're going to go into the actual nature reserve itself and look for the birds. And rufous tree pie is a really smart looking bird. When you get a nice view of one in good light, really pretty looking tree pie, a bit related to the crow family, and really, really pretty colours. So Ranthambhore, dry forest with some great birds. We might drive around, we might see things like spotted owlets just huddled up on a branch. As we go a bit further around some of the wetland areas, there might be some birds on the edge of the water, like Indian stone curlew. We may get lucky and see greater painted snipe in some of the wetland areas. And in the wetlands, the rivers, the dry areas, we might also find things like black stork with their incredible iridescent plumage, super red bill, really nice looking stork. So black stork is quite frequent. Or we might find things like the really superb plum-headed parakeet, one of the best names of any birds. That's a really plum-coloured head on that nice male there, really beautiful looking bird. So these are quite common in the park. So plum-headed parakeet. And we'll also perhaps bump into some woodpeckers. Black rump flameback is a real Indian speciality, really pretty looking woodpecker, quite a large woodpecker with lots of different colours and a blackish wing coverts and a rump. And also we might find this very tiny brown-capped pygmy woodpecker. And this is a bit like downy woodpecker in the US, quite a small woodpecker. But it's got this lovely little brown cap, and this pale eye, this startling pale eye is actually diagnostic. If you see one with a pale eye, it's the brown-capped pygmy woodpecker. So we get hopefully good views of these. But there's also some animals in the park here. We might find there's lots of samba, there's lots of chital deer, the spotted deer as well. But there seems to be lots and lots of samba deer in this park, and they're sometimes really huge. Some of these stags are massive with big antlers, but a really chunky deer. I've just noticed in the bottom of the photograph there's also a white-breasted water hen. But sambar deer are really kind of quite frequent in the park, and something we're always looking out for. And we're also listening out for the calls of the deer. The alarm calls of the deer sometimes alert to predators around. So that's sometimes a signal that there might be a tiger or a leopard in the area. So something that the guides and us are always listening out for. So sambar deer are quite frequent. Our guides often know, the local guides, that the rangers know sometimes where there might be roosting owls, like this brown fish owl. It's very different from the tawny fish owl we saw earlier, much more colder tones. It's not so rich coloured, more closely barred underneath. The streaking's not so bold, but nevertheless a really smart owl and a really large owl. This is a really chunky owl. This is one of the biggest owls as well. So nice to see them. And we also may come across painted spurfowl, which kind of is often around the area by the entrance to the fort. Really smart looking gallinaceous bird, pheasant type bird, with this kind of lovely deep maroon colour and these black edged white spots all over the male. So very pretty. And one of the best places to see painted spurfowl. It's normally quite a scarce bird, hard to see, but Ranthambhore are a good place to see them. And the scenery around here is really amazing. There's some old ruin areas around the reserve adjacent to wetlands. And one of my most frustrating things is I know that other people have actually had the privilege of seeing a tiger sat in one of these windows. And I can't imagine what that photograph must be like. I keep hoping that one of these days when I'm there, it'll happen for me. But yeah, imagine having a tiger sitting in one of these windows, and what a photograph that would be. They are sometimes seen in this area, just sitting in these windows. So there's a good chance that tiger is going to be there one day for me. I'll have to keep going back. But we might come across some primates like southern plains grey langur. They're quite common. They're often on the ground. They'll obviously jump up into the trees, but they'll often be, as we're driving around, adjacent to the vehicles. You get some nice close views of those. And if you're really lucky, you might come across sloth bear. Sloth bear is a quite large, ponderous, slow-moving bear. Doesn't really take any notice of any visitors. It just keeps walking in its own direction. So if you find one, normally you can follow it for a little while. And this is the kind of the inspiration for Baloo the bear in the Jungle Book. So slow-moving, kind of ponderous bear that walks around on the forest floor, and a large bear. But sometimes you get lucky and get some really close views like David has here. But Ranthambhore is famous for one animal in particular, and that's this one, the Bengal tiger. We've already talked about tiger in Corbett National Park, but Ranthambhore has got a really large population. I think in the 2023 census, there were estimated to be 88 tigers in the park. So that's a really high density of tigers. So there's a really good chance of seeing tiger. It's always a kind of a challenge finding one, but there's a good chance of seeing one in Ranthambhore. And if you're really lucky, you can get some incredible close views of tiger in Ranthambhore. They really can be quite obliging, and you can get some incredible photographic opportunities to see this quite amazing creature. It's an absolute privilege to see tiger in the wild, and yeah, as I said earlier on, you can't see enough of them ever. Views like this are hoped for, but more often you might get a view like this as it's creeping through the understory. But as I said, any view of a tiger is worth having, and just seeing this incredible animal just moving through the forest like this, even if it's a little far off or it's obscured, it's just an incredible privilege to see, and yeah, really amazing. So Ranthambhore, it's delivered loads of birds, loads of animals for us. We then head to Keoladeo, or better known by most people probably as Bharatpur. And Bharatpur is another area that was created for, this was also created for some duck shooting. So this was a duck shooting preserve created in about 1850. And it's only about 11 square miles, and it's a series of shallow pools with some roadways round. So we tend to head around this area either in bicycle rickshaws, like you can see in the picture there, or we just wander around the trails, around the wide roads, and look for birds. really nice habitat, lots of trees, lots of forest, but also lots of big expanses of water with some marshland and some areas of reeds and so on and so forth. So some really nice wetland species here. It was established as a national park in 1982, and it has some really nice birds on the wetland areas, which are really easy to see. So things like oriental darter, we may come across really photogenic birds. Also a really good place to see things like black-necked stork, a really impressive stork, a bit like the saddle-billed stork of Africa, with this huge bill, a very tall stork with this lovely glossy black neck, beautiful looking bird. Also, we may come across things like Brahminy starling. They often frequent the areas where you might have your lunch, and we're walking around this area, so we could stop and have a picnic, a packed lunch in the area here, or even a cooked lunch is brought to us sometimes. But really smart birds, Brahminy starling, when you get a nice close view with the shaggy breasts. But one of the birds that we special in Keoladeo is Sarus crane. It's a really good area for seeing Sarus crane. And in fact, it used to also be a really good area for seeing Siberian white crane. There used to be a population that wintered here, but unfortunately they haven't been seen since about 2002. But as birders always do, we hope that one day that they'll come back. So there's always a chance that, as this was on their kind of wintering kind of hotspot for them in the past, that hopefully one day they'll return. But nevertheless, it's a great place to see Sarus crane. It's a really large crane with this beautiful kind of deep red neck. There's a young one on the left-hand side there, so a little family party. But Sarus crane is one of the real specialities of Bharatpur or Keoladeo. So good chances of seeing these, sometimes really close views as well. Also, it's another place where you get wintering bar-headed geese. We're obviously talking about being here in the winter months, and bar-headed geese sort of frequent these shallow pools. And these are incredible birds. The physiology and the stamina these guys have is incredible. These guys have been documented flying over the Himalayas at 27,000 feet, and even reports of them over Mount Everest at 29,000 feet. So yeah, just to imagine the lack of oxygen and the temperatures that these guys are experiencing when they're migrating at these altitudes is incredible. They've been seen from planes as they're on migration, so they are incredible birds, really striking looking geese, but also amazing stamina to kind of withstand these kind of high migrations over the Himalayas. And good chances of seeing these birds at Bharatpur. And one of the other animals that we see here is this beast, the Indian python. They have some huge pythons at this place. I know that everybody likes snakes, but this one that we saw was maybe 4 or 5 meters long. The body, the thickness of your thigh. So a really chunky snake, and they have like burrows where they kind of go into, and if it gets too disturbed, it will just slink away into its burrow. So it's quite hidden there. You can just see its head in the middle of the picture there. But Indian python, amazing to see such large snakes. So yeah, really, really amazing things to see. So moving away from Bharatpur, we then head to Chambal River. And we have a nice boat trip down the Chambal River here, where we'll look for things like great stone curlew with their enormous bill and massive eye. So great stone curlew often sitting on the side of the river here. And we'll also perhaps come across river lapwing. We may have already seen these, perhaps at Kosi River or other places. But really nice bird to see sitting on the. They kind of frequent these higher elevation, sort of rocky rivers. So river lapwing is one bird that we're hopefully looking out for. But the real prize here is this one, Indian skimmer. This is a great place to see Indian skimmer. And as we are out on our boat trip, we might come across a little group of them flying around or on a sandbank and get some amazing views of these incredible birds. And they're quite scarce now. They're quite hard to see in India these days. Some of the rivers have become too dirty for them. So Chambal River is a real hotspot for them now, and hopefully there's some good chances that we will see them. And also, as we're driving around with swanning up and down the river, we might come across things like black-bellied tern, small prat and coal, river tern. So lots of other birds. We're also on the whole trip looking for Ganges River dolphin. I don't have any pictures, but this is also a really good place for seeing Ganges River dolphin, and they're quite frequently seen here. But one thing we also certainly see is gharial, this amazing crocodilian, can be up to 6 meters long, with this incredible thin snout with 110 really sharp teeth. So really designed for catching fish. This is a female. The males have a really large kind of boss on the end of the snout, like a large knob on the end of the snout. But this is an amazing creature, and there are often several of them hauled out on the banks alongside mugger crocodiles. But the gharial are really quite impressive beasts with their really long snouts and really weird looking head. So a really good chance of seeing gharial. Not far away from here, we'll end up looking at around Dolpur. There's some nice open sort of fields around here where we've got some chances of seeing this bird, Indian courser. It's quite a hard bird to see, but this is probably a really good area for them. Also things like Isabelline and desert wheatear, Egyptian vultures, lots of larks. So a really nice place to do some kind of general birding, Indian rollers, stuff like this. But Indian courser, the big prize here. And we're not far away now from one of the most iconic places in India now, which is the Taj Mahal. And we have a whole morning devoted to going to this place. And it is really absolutely worth visiting this place. It's an incredible place. It's perhaps the best love letter that anybody's ever produced. It was built by the 5th Mughal emperor to house the body of his deceased wife, and it's the ultimate kind of love letter, really. This incredible marble building was started in 1631 and was finished in 1648, and it's perfectly symmetrical. So from every side, it looks the same, and it really is a truly amazing place to visit in the early morning with the light as it is. It's an incredible place. And if you're still birding, there are often things like Egyptian vultures sitting on the top of the Taj, and then behind there's a river where you can see things like Pallas's gull and ruddy shelduck and stuff like that. But the spectacle of the Taj Mahal is really something to behold, and we make no apologies for spending a whole morning here. It's well worth it. It's an incredible place. And we would have visited other places in Agra, the Agra Fort as well. So we get to really experience a bit of culture and see some of these incredible buildings that are in this area. But the Taj Mahal is clearly one of those most world famous buildings that you have to visit if you're in the area. So yeah, fantastic. Really, really enjoyed the morning that we spend here. So that was the kind of tour that we talked about. We then head back to Delhi, and then for our final departures, or moving on to some other parts of India where we can see some other things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Assam, Eagle Nest and the Mishmi Hills, principally focusing on Assam, and then just touch briefly on the other two places. When you're going birding, you get to go to some really amazing places and visit some really wonderful places. But Guwahati Tip, I have to say, is not one of those. But it is a place that you have to go if you come to Assam. Guwahati Tip is probably the best place in the world to see greater adjutant. And this is a really range-restricted species. It only breeds in 3 places. It's a couple of places in India, one in Cambodia, so very rare. But the Guwahati Tip is one of the places where there are large numbers of them, quite often mixed in with the locals. And again, this is one of these experiences that you cannot underestimate. It's a hideous place, I have to say. It stinks, it's rubbish, but seeing this is just kind of another example of India in all its rawness. You know, as this machine was digging, as the bucket moved, the detritus over, people would rush in to try and grab whatever they can, plastics or whatever they could sell, but they're mixing with egrets and greater adjutants and cattle. I mean, it's a scene like no other scene, and you can see there's greater adjutants all over the show, as well as cattle egrets and cows everywhere. I mean, it's sad in many ways because they're just trying to find bits of plastic they can sell to make a living. But it's an incredible spectacle, and it's one of the best places in the world to see greater adjutant. So somewhere we visit. Not far from here, though, is a really nice nature reserve called Kaziranga. And Kaziranga is about 1,000 square miles of kind of really nice, square kilometers, sorry, of really nice open wetland, grassland, super habitats with bits of forest intermingled interspersed in this kind of open habitat. And this is a really good place to see things like lesser adjutant, which is you can see it's different from the greater adjutant. Doesn't have the pale wing panel, but both of them similar to the marabou stork of Africa and occupy the same sort of niche, that sort of carrion feeding bird. But yeah, good place to see them. Indian spot-billed ducks, and then also things like yellow-footed green pigeon, a really nice-looking pigeon. Also some big animals like water buffalo. There's some really huge water buffalo at this place. And as we're on to kind of wetland areas, we might find things like the really smart bronze-winged jacanas, maybe some pheasant-tailed jacanas as well, but bronze-winged jacanas. And also, it's one of the places where you can see, it's very rare still here, but you can see Bengal florican. So there's still a chance of seeing Bengal florican in Kaziranga. As we drive around, again, it's another place where we do it in vehicles. There's some bits of grassland where these frequent, some specific areas where the Bengal florican is often seen. So we'll try and find these if we can. A very rare bird, but a good chance of finding one in Kaziranga. And also things like pied falconet, again, quite scarce, quite localized distribution in different places. Another tiny falcon, just black and white, this one, pied falconet, very small again. Again, sort of smaller than American robin, smaller than a blackbird, but super smart bird. But one of the things about Kaziranga is the great Indian one-horned rhinoceros. This is a really amazing place for these animals. There are estimated to be over 2,600 in the park. On our first afternoon on one of the tours, we saw about 40 or 50 of these animals, and they really are incredible. Normally rhinos are quite difficult to see, but the great Indian one-horned rhino in Kaziranga is they're around. You'll see them. There's lots of them, and they're really impressive beasts. These are the ones with the real armor plating, the armor plates on them. So a really amazing looking beast. So they can be a little bit feisty if you get too close. So we have to be on our wits, and we watch what the local guides and the drivers are really careful about approaching too closely. But you can get really close views of these amazing creatures. So Kaziranga is a really good place to see these animals. If we go a bit further afield, so Kaziranga is part of the Assam Trail tour extension. If you go up into places like the Mishmi Hills or Eagle Nest, you've got chances of seeing some more amazing pheasants, things like blood pheasant, a super smart bird with this lovely plumage and red on the sometimes on the chest as well as around the eye and the legs, on the underparts as well. Fantastic looking animal. And if you're really lucky in some of these kind of Himalayan kind of extensions, you've got a chance of seeing this one, the Himalayan monal. Surely one of the most amazing birds that there is ever to see. It's the iridescence and the colors of the Himalayan monal pheasant are unbelievable. A super looking bird. So fantastic. And then there's also a chance of, if you're really lucky in these kind of extensions, seeing things like red panda. Some of these areas in the kind of Himalayas and in the bamboo forest, good chance of seeing red panda. So always kind of keep your wits about you. One of the most sought after mammals in the world for people to see. So an amazing thing when you do see one as well. So this area is really well covered by some excellent field guides, and the birds of northern India or southern India are really handy in that they just cover the north of the south part, which is really handy. It means that you can be focused on which species you're going to see. The Indian subcontinent covers all of it, including Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and other places. But there's some really good modern field guides around, and these are the ones I tend to use. So with that, I'd like to bring our tour to a conclusion. And thank you very much. We'll cover some questions in a second. But I want to just leave you with one more slide, which is the different tours that are on offer. There are still places on some of these tours, and hopefully it's whet your appetite to perhaps think about a trip to India, as Dan said at the beginning, for all the things it brings you, not just the birds, the tigers, the cats, the animals, but the culture and the whole experience is honestly, India is like no other place I've ever been to. It's an incredible place. So several tours of the one I've just explained, and then some of the extensions into Assam or the Western Himalayas, which would cover other places as well. So with that, Dan, I'll hand back to you and see if there's anything we need to field in terms of questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. I so enjoyed your talk. It brought back so many fantastic memories. I haven't done this Northern India leg for a few years now, but it remains one of my absolute favorite tours. As
Absolutely.
you so brilliantly said, it's the perfect combination of birds, wildlife, culture. The cuisine is incredible. The accommodations are fantastic throughout. So really, there is no destination like it. As you have also so brilliantly indicated here, we do have some spaces on some of our upcoming departures, one of which is quite soon, 2nd to the 18th of December. It's a 17-day tour, Birds and Tigers tour, which covers all of the main regions that Paul spoke about. And following that, there is a short extension as well, covering Assam. I do also just want to highlight, so my role at Rock Jumpers, I'm the tailor-made tours manager. India is one of the most fantastic destinations for tailor-made tours. We regularly run small group tours, even just with the local leader, birds, culture, even tours specifically focused around seeing tiger. And so in terms of the price point of India, there really isn't a destination like it. The local guides are absolutely incredible, and we do regularly run tours with just local guides as well. But our upcoming tours have some availability, and it would obviously be wonderful if some of these trips would run. In terms of questions, first, I do want to just convey a comment. Well, there's many comments coming in here for you, Paul. Just thanking you for your excellent presentation. Really good job. Patricia Nurse does also say it was so good to relive the trip that she did with you in December 2022. And she did see the back of her head in a couple of your photos. Thank you for joining, Patricia. It was one. I hope you really enjoyed reliving your memories with Paul, and we hope to see you on some of our trips again sometime in the future. In terms of questions, Catherine Carroll has a few questions, mainly about the transport arrangements for the tour. It is a unique tour in that we make use of multiple transport arrangements, from trains to buses to small Jimny type Jeeps to even rickshaw birding. I wonder if you could just briefly touch on the transport arrangements of the tour, given that there is no other trip like this anywhere in the world.
No, so like when we start in Delhi, so when we do our first trip to Sultanpur, we have a coach, so like a proper bus that will take us out on over to Sultanpur. But when we do the bigger trips, either to Ramnagar up into the northeast, where we're looking for to head to the Himalayan foothills, or down to Ranthambhore, we tend to take the train. I think I said to you that driving in India is an experience. Let's put it that way. The rules are that there are no rules. That seems to be the way it works in India. So it means that traveling by train, although it still has its challenges sometimes, it's much more likely that we're going to get to the destination at the time we hope to get to the destination. So for some of the big trips, we'll head early morning and head to the kind of locations by train. In the past, Dan, and I think you probably experienced this, we used to do overnight trains, and we've decided not to do that anymore. They were a bit uncomfortable, and we found that they weren't really kind of conducive to people being happy on the tours. So we now do kind of early morning departures, and they're about 5-hour trips or something like that. So they're kind of perfectly manageable. We normally get a decent packed lunch by our local agent to take with us. So normally it's kind of a comfortable way of traveling. You can either sleep, you can get up and have a walk around. The trains are quite busy often, but we're normally in kind of like the class of travel that's normally quite pleasant. So it's a comfortable way to travel. And then when we're in the parks, some of the parks like Keoladeo, so Bharatpur, as you said, we can travel around on foot. Same in Sattal and Manila, where we kind of bird in by road along the road. We're doing foot birding, just walking around. In Keoladeo in Bharatpur, we do have these rickshaws, which is actually quite useful because we're trying to cover quite large areas. We're walking around these large pool areas, so sometimes it's quite a bit. I tried to walk alongside one of the rickshaws thinking it'd be easy, but they're actually much quicker than you expect them to be. So it's worth jumping on a rickshaw. You go much quicker. And then when we get to the national parks like Ranthambhore and Jim Corbett and Kaziranga, come to that in Assam, that's birding from vehicles. So in Jim Corbett, it would be small jeeps, small four-wheel drive vehicles that we're kind of traveling around, open, so you've got good visibility all round. Whereas in Ranthambhore, we tend to have these large kind of, they call them canters, large truck-like vehicles that means that, again, you've got visibility around. And I'll be honest, it's quite bumpy around the tracks in Ranthambhore. It can be a bit jolty, but especially if someone's found a tiger and the guy wants to get there quickly, which we all want him to get there quickly. So sometimes we have what they call a Ferrari safari, where we go a bit quicker. And I know that African guys are well aware of those, that might have done those as well. But it's the different vehicles we use tend to lend themselves to the best situations. Of course, when we kind of arrive at different locations like Ramnagar, we'll then jump into smaller vehicles to transfer to hotels or to reserves, or on buses to get into the reserves. So we'll have vehicles between sites, but big journeys on trains, and then traveling around either on foot or in different types of vehicles in the parks. And the reason we're in the vehicles is that there are elephants, water buffalo, rhinos, tigers, leopards. You need to be a bit careful in some of these parks, and the vehicles are the best way of traveling around, but also seeing animals and birds. So it works really well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paul. And just to reiterate what you said there. So we used to make use of overnight trains from Delhi up to Ramnagar. It used to take us 6 to 7 hours. So we would board typically after dinner, and we would arrive in the early hours of the morning. We no longer make use of those overnight trains. We've restructured the itineraries to offer far more comfortable and enjoyable experiences for all. To put it in perspective, the same drive from Delhi to Ramnagar would probably take in the region of about 20 to 25 hours at least, given the road congestion. And so by using the train, we do the same trip in 5 or 6 hours. Sometimes if we can get one of the higher speed trains that have fewer stops. And it is a relatively pleasant experience. I mean, you have your own seat, and in the past, I've even had a meal service come round, and the meal was perfectly adequate and perfectly edible. So it's certainly a way of covering large distances much quicker, and a surprisingly comfortable experience that allows us to access these sites far quicker than expected. We do have a question about air pollution here, and I would certainly not like to give misinformation. The air in and around Delhi can be a little bit problematic, and I personally do wear just a filtered mask in and around Delhi, but usually once we escape Delhi, there's no issues at all with air quality, especially up in the Himalayan foothills. You're breathing beautiful air.
Yeah, once you're up there, it's fantastic. Yeah, places like Jim Corbett and up in Manila and Sattal, it's a wonderful experience. It's dusty in places like Ranthambhore because it's dry, and you're traveling around on the roads, on the trails in the forest there. But as you say, Delhi can be quite smoggy. But once you're in the Himalayas, it's fantastic. It's the foothills of the Himalayas. It's beautiful up there.
It certainly is. Ricky Rabbits is then asking how physically demanding this tour is, and he also just thanks you for a lovely presentation. So thank you.
I would say it's not actually too demanding, this tour. As I said, a lot of the national park stuff is done in vehicles, and as we've said, Ranthambhore, Corbett. In Keoladeo, we've got the rickshaws, which are actually surprisingly comfortable, so they're quite a nice way of traveling around. And then when we're doing the birding in places like Sattal or Manila, we're just really walking slowly around the roads. We might be reasonably, we're not that high, so it's not uncomfortably high in terms of making you feel kind of lightheaded. And it's nice flat roads. Probably the Kosi River is probably the hardest part of terrestrial birding when you're walking, because we're walking perhaps along the edge of the river sometimes to look for Ibisbill, and that can be a bit uneven or it can be sandy. But I would say this is not a demanding. It's not a demanding trip in terms of the terrain and the walking. There's a few early morning starts, like we've talked about, to get the trains. But actually, when we're actually on site, it's quite a civilized trip also in terms of start times. It's not one of these trips where you're starting at ridiculous early hours and doing lots of night birding. So it's a relatively relaxed, easy-ish tour, I would say, for people to take, with some incredible things to see as well.
I'd certainly agree with you there, Paul. And just to add to that, we do break the trip up quite nicely. So the tour begins with a few days up in the Himalayan foothills. You then have something of a travel day to get down south. So there's an opportunity to sort of recover, if you will, mid-trip. And then a few days down in the south looking for tigers and such. Then there's cultural activities thrown in, which are far more leisurely and less running around. So it's a really, really enjoyable trip. Every evening you're going back to incredible accommodations. The food is fantastic. Even the packed lunches that we get on occasion are absolutely fantastic. So
and quite often, Dan, they'll bring a hot meal out to us on the side of a road and the side of a mountain with amazing scenery as well. It's incredible.
So the trip comes with incredible comfort. So a few early morning starts, but it's really nicely balanced. And certainly when we're in the presence of dangerous game in the larger reserves, we are confined to vehicles. So we're not walking immense distances.
No.
There are a few places where walking is permitted, but in the reserves, we are largely confined to vehicles.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We then have a question about the time of year. Now, these trips typically run in the winter months, certainly autumn into winter. A large reason for that is the monsoon. Now, interestingly, the Indian Ocean is the only ocean in the world that's confined to the north by a continental landmass. And so what you get over the Indian subcontinent is this incredible reversal of wind systems that leads to what everyone knows then as the monsoon season. So during the summer, it can be extremely hot. It can be extremely unpleasant. And you get these deluges that can make getting around quite difficult. It can obviously impact birding. There are certain areas of India that one can escape the monsoon. But the added benefit of traveling in the winter months, aside from the overall expected climate and risk of rainfall and temperature and such, is the presence of migrant species, as Paul highlighted. So you get large numbers of wintering birds coming onto the Indian subcontinent, escaping the colder climates further north. Lots of really cool robins and flycatchers and bits and pieces. You get the bar-headed geese. It's probably the best place in the world to see bar-headed geese in huge numbers. So really, really worthwhile in the winter months. It does, of course, mean up in the mountains, it's a little bit cooler in the mornings, but it's very pleasant temperatures. We're not at extreme altitudes. You might, if you're very unlucky, get a snowfall, but it's very, very comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's right, Dan. And I think we found often that if it was cold at the beginning of the morning when we were up there, by 10 o'clock, it was actually really a pleasant temperature. Up in the Himalayan foothills around Manila and Sattal, it's quite pleasant. So layers is really important. Being able to take layers off. It was cold when you first start out there, but warms up quite quickly. And that time of year tends to be quite dry and sunny, but not too hot, like you said, which is can be equally debilitating as well as the rain. If it's really hot, sometimes when you're bird watching, it's really uncomfortable. So the combination of temperature and the abundance of birds at that time of year is a really a spot on combination. It works really well.
Absolutely. Paul, we do then have one question from an anonymous attendee, and I think it is a valid question given the destination, and I know you can provide some reassurances here. So she says, sorry to ask, we can answer offline. I do think it's for the benefit of other attendees that we do answer this live, but what about digestive health in India based on our experiences? Is it something to be concerned about? In my experience, not. I do typically suffer from these sorts of things in some of the places we visit. I haven't had any issues in India in the past, but Paul, I'll let you speak from your experience there.
And I think it's always a slight risk. I think as Dan said, the places we stay are really, most of them are top class, really nice places. And some of the hotels are, like you said, Dan, some of the most amazing hotels I've ever been in. You even get a welcome as you arrive in some of them. It's incredible, with bands and things. So they are an amazing. The hotels are really top quality. The food is generally really excellent. You need to be careful, and I think where you can come unstuck is water. So you need to be careful with water and making sure that you're both drinking and cleaning teeth in water, in bottled water, you know, I think on all the trips that I do, I always have a little bit of a supply of loperamide just in case, to just make sure that if anything does happen, because it can happen in any country, to be honest with you. It can happen in Europe as well as it can happen in India, but not encountered huge issues with it in the groups that I've led there. But it is, I would say, not specific to India. It's a challenge in any country that you visit. You have to be careful. So always be mindful of the water. But as you said, Dan, the food, the quality of the food on this trip is incredible. It's of really high quality, and it's not necessarily overly spicy. It's not, you know, people don't need to worry about it being too hot. There are always a range of dishes and an opportunity to make it spicier if you want to. But the flavors and the quality of the food is absolutely excellent. So I would say it's a consideration, but certainly wouldn't deter anybody from coming. It's an occupational hazard for any travel, I would say, rather than specifically India.
I agree fully there. And something just to add on that front is access to medical facilities in India is generally very, very good. And to use an example there, we had a recent tailor-made tour visiting an extremely remote part of northeast India. Our client developed a terrible tooth abscess in a matter of a few days. And despite the remoteness, our local team of partners managed to organize that a physician came and saw us in the field. We got her the required medications, and she was sorted and back out in the field with us within a day or two. So access to medical facilities, if we need them, we usually don't, is very, very good in India. We then have one question from Ian asking whether we have trips to northern India that offer any prospects for Blythe's Tragopan and Blythe's Kingfisher. I certainly know that we do. We run a trip to northeast India covering Mishmi Hills and Eagle's Nest. And Nigel Redman led our tour last year, and they were successful with Blythe's Tragopan. They had a glorious male cross the trail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very jealous of those photographs, Dan.
Absolutely, it was spectacular.
Yeah, so that's the one. The Mishmi Hills is probably the best place for both, for certainly the Blythe's Tragopan. That's one. Blythe's Kingfisher is a much more challenging bird, but I know that I know Forrest has recently seen Blythe's Kingfish, but I'm trying to remember on which trip that was on.
So that was a recent trip to Southeast China.
Okay.
For the time being, become the place to see Blythe's Kingfisher. Although it is technically possible in Northeast India, it remains extremely difficult.
Very tough. I don't think there are really good places, locations, but Blythe's Tragopan is is a genuine possibility up in that northeast Mishmi Hills area, an eagle nest. Yeah.
Absolutely. It certainly is. That northeast corner of India is one of the best places in Asia for pheasants, blyths, and some of the other tragopans are possible there. Himalayan monal, as you highlighted. There's even a chance for the exceedingly rare Sclater's monal in parts of northeast India and early November, I believe it is. So a really incredible part of the world with some really great birds.
With a whole range of wren babblers and other things as well up there to boot. So a really exciting destination, that part of the world.
Indeed. I think we need a separate webinar to cover Northeast India alone.
Should be another one, I think. Yeah, should be another one.
Part of the world. So, Paul, on that note, I think we will once again say an incredible thank you for just a truly wonderful webinar this evening. You really showcased the very best of what India has on offer. There really is, as you've said several times, there's no country like this anywhere in the world. The perfect mix of birding, wildlife, and culture, and just a complete feast for the senses from start to finish. So thank you for showcasing that so brilliantly for us. Thank you to all of our attendees this evening for spending your evenings or mornings wherever in the world you are. Thank you for joining us, and please remember this webinar will appear live on our YouTube channel and on our website in the next day or two if you missed the start of the webinar this evening, the opening few slides. And if you'd like to catch recordings of any of our previous webinars, you can find them there. If you would like to consult our website for upcoming tours, simply navigate through the Asian department into India and you will see all of the upcoming scheduled tours. And if you would like to consider a tailor-made tour to India, we're just an email away at tailormade@rockjumper.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and thank you again for joining us this evening.